This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
The annual Quaker Lecture for 2022 recently took place in Christchurch and featured Viritza Rupar, Professor of Journalism at AUT. Here she is introduced by co-clerk Anne Hall.
Now I'm delighted to introduce and welcome our lecturer, Viritza Rupar. Viritza's lecture tonight, The Search for Truth, Information, Disinformation, and the Algorithms of Social Media, relates to the integrity of political and public discourse, which is under threat in our time. We are challenged daily to discern what is credible information or the truth on any topic amongst the plethora of information sources available in our world. Viritza is currently a professor in journalism in the School of Communication Studies at Auckland University of Technology and chair of the World Journalism Education Council. Before moving to academia, she has worked as a journalist and taught journalism in Serbia, Slovenia, Hungary, Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand. Her academic work includes studies of epistemology of journalism, relationship between journalism, media, and democracy, as well as communication practices around key social issues relevant for the promotion of social inclusion. Viritza's most recent research focuses on the post-truth environment and dramatic diffusion of misinformation in the digital world. Viritza, we are delighted that you have agreed to present the 2020 Quaker Lecture. We hope the presentation and publication of the lecture encourages further discussion and discourse on this important topic. We look forward to hearing from you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Viritza Rupar tōku ingoa. I would like to acknowledge mana whenua, their history, their struggles, and their aspiration. Among the various meanings of the word truth, the one that appears most intriguing to me is truth as knowledge of the truth. If I were to tell you a story about difficulties in finding the truth and make an argument that journalism helps us navigate between information and misinformation, my plan for tonight, it has to start with this note on the distinction between truth and knowledge of the truth. If I were to make an argument that in the world spanned by the algorithms of social media, a mutually reinforcing confirmation bias dominates, then distinction between facts and opinions, truth and knowledge of truth, really matters. One might say the truth is metaphysical and spiritual, the thing as it is, while the knowledge of truth is the truth as it appears. A story about the war, for example, told by numbers of people killed, wounded, and displaced. A story of war, as told by a woman fleeing her home with a toddler in her arms and the memory of home lost. The difference seems easy to spot. In the first case, we are talking about depersonalized facts. In the second case, we bring the context of truth, our pre-existing knowledge, experiences, feelings, beliefs, and more broadly, human relation to reality. We say that war is an extension of politics by other means, a widely accepted fact, or we say war is an act of violence that is always morally wrong. if the war was that simple. On March 13 this year, when devastating news items about Russia's brutal invasion on Ukraine ran one after the other on my screen, I got an email from a friend with one word in the subject line: Zelensky. The Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, hero of an unjust war, a symbol of a nation's willingness to protect freedom, asking the international community to act. That must be the story behind the forwarded link, I thought. The opposite was true. The link led to the headline, "What Pandora Papers Revealed About Zelensky's Offshore Accounts and Funding from Ukrainian Kleptocracy." The article, published on the Greek website New Economy, claimed that Ukrainian President Zelensky rose to power on pledges to clean up the East European country, but the Pandora Papers revealed he and his close circle were the beneficiaries of a network of offshore companies, including some that owned expensive London properties. Really? Misinformation, Russian propaganda hiding behind the Greek website. A quick Google search revealed the story was a reprint of the October news based on the release of the Pandora Papers by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The original story was published in the international media at the time. It featured in The Guardian, too, and it was authored by an excellent journalist who, by incident, I know. Two strong reasons to trust it. The story was based on evidence that President Zelensky and his partners in comedy production owned a network of offshore companies based in the British Virgin Islands, Cyprus and Belize. Why did I feel, and why does one feel differently reading the same story in October and in March at the beginning of Ukraine war? The answer to this question sits between two abstract ideas: the idea of truth and the notion of reality. I will try to unpack both of these by outlining three spheres of social action where concepts of truth and reality take a really tangible form: the world of journalism, the world of media, and the world of internet, which more often than not leave us feeling disoriented and confused about the world as it is. So let's start with journalism. Finding and telling the truth, as the history of journalism shows, has been a professional credo since the first newspapers were published in the 17th century. A journalist is a mediator of truth, one who overcomes the singularity of the event and who, by interpreting the event, transforms reported reality into universal experience and commonly shared knowledge. Two distinctive visions of journalists have been developed over the years. One is the position of a neutral reporter, the other is of a participant. Both are developed in relation to the wider social space. The first refers to ideas of the press as an informer, interpreter, and instrument of government, lending itself as a channel or a mirror. The second is the traditional fourth estate notion, covering ideas of the press as a representative of us, the public, critic of the government, an advocate of policy and policymaker, to cite my favorite scholar, McQuail. If journalists are truth seekers, it is integrity and the values of honesty and truthfulness that should guide their representation of reality. As Quakers value integrity and personal testimony over received opinion, journalists believe too They should be honest and truthful when doing their work. Reprinting the October story about Zelensky, therefore, should include the information on why it is relevant in March at that particular point of time. I said that I knew the author of the original story, investigative journalist Aubrey Belfort. I told him I was preparing this lecture and asked if he knew of other news outlets reprinting the story, and if he knew if it triggered a wider social media discussion. I'm not sure who else published it, Aubrey said, but I did see the story get picked up a lot on social media and respun as part of pro-Russian narratives. We all know it is a narrative that gives meaning to the story and knowledge about the truth. In the case of journalism, the news coverage of events tend to appear a truthful account of reality the closer it falls to the prevailing consensus of the moment. To illustrate different standards of reporting in relation to politics, media scholar Daniel Hallin draws a map of 3 concentric circles, where the circles correspond to the spheres of consensus, of controversy, and of the deviance in society. Within the sphere of consensus, he explains, exist social issues the journalist regards as non-controversial. When dealing with such issues, journalists do not feel compelled to present opposing views or to remain disinterested observers. On the contrary, the journalist's role is to serve as an advocate or celebrant of consensus values. In the sphere of legitimate controversy, such as elections or legislative debates, exist social issues that journalists consider suitable subjects of partisan dispute. When this is the case, objectivity and balance are the ruling journalistic principles. The third sphere, the sphere of deviance, is a region occupied by political actors and views which journalists and the political mainstream of the society reject as unworthy of being heard. In this sphere, journalism throws away the mask of neutrality and plays the role of exposing, condemning, excluding from the public agenda those who violate or challenge the political consensus. It marks out and defends the limit of acceptable political conflict. The boundaries between the 3 spheres are not fixed, but fluid and changeable over time. The majority of journalists strongly believe that these spheres of consensus do not affect their work. At the end of the story, they are truth tellers, neutral interpreters of events. This strong belief is the essence of journalistic values, defined as professional norms of accuracy, fairness, balance, and objectivity. In making news judgments and creating knowledge about events, issues, and people beyond our own experience, journalists are led by this set of norms that create professional integrity and define how the work should be done, what is good practice and what is not. Good journalism, like good governance, is a testimony of civic duty to serve the community. When Aubrey and his colleagues dug into 11.9 million documents known as the Pandora Papers, the largest investigation in journalism history, their aim was to serve the public globally, to expose a shadow financial system that benefits the world's most rich and the most powerful. That is what we, the audience, the citizens, want to know. However, the truth about the facts reads differently in the context of peace and in the context of war. Otherwise, suddenly bringing Zelensky's business deals at the center of the story about Ukraine wouldn't feel that wrong and uncomfortable. Do you know who stands behind the new economy? Aubrey asked. I didn't know. The website is in English and in Greek, and the English version does not provide information about the editorial team and the site owners. That is where we stand now. We don't always know where the information is coming from. The current media landscape includes traditional mainstream media, plus social media, plus media outlets that sit in between. Established media organizations such as the New Zealand Herald, Radio New Zealand, BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera are those we first run to when breaking news such as the start of a war occurs. They have developed a reputation over the years. We base our trust and in some cases mistrust in their news on a number of factors. Their performance over time, the form of journalism they practice, knowing who owns them, how the newsroom is organized, and how they fit in the cultural, political, and social environment within which they operate. Also, on the ethical norms that drive their journalism. That is the world of traditional, mainstream, we call them legacy media. What do we know about social media, a central part of our experience of using the internet? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok have mostly developed as commercial companies designed to provide, and I cite, internet-based and persistent channels of mass personal communication, facilitating perceptions of interactions among users, deriving value primarily from user-generated content. They operate thanks to the messages we produce, we share, and we comment on. Free labor that is digital, affective, and, as we all know, emotional. This part of cyberspace allows people to talk to each other directly, with no mediators such as journalists to process the information available. This follows the basic principle of the internet, which started out as a bulletin board system, which allowed users to exchange software, data, messages, and news with each other. The question that we all ask is, how powerful are they nowadays? The last statistics show there are about 4 billion users of social media across the globe. Every second person in the world uses social media. But that's only part of the truth, because the digital divide tells us a different story. The move to the online sphere has not been a socially equal one, and the inability of many to connect meaningfully online is a critical concern. With physical distancing and lockdown restrictions in place in the last 2.5 years, activities like working, learning, or meeting with friends require these digital tools. Between these two poles of the media landscape, traditional media and social media, exists other information space. Online outlets, websites of companies, governmental and non-governmental web pages, unions, as well as one-man run businesses, blogs and video blogs. The new economy that republished Zelensky's story among them. One might argue these information spaces are different. They are, of course they are different. But the question that I like to ask is, are we different when accessing these spaces? each of us, with our individual interests, knowledge, and set of values, are we different when engaging with traditional media, with companies and organizations' websites, and with social media? It seems to me that we switch between the news on Russian aggression in Ukraine, the Ministry of Health statement about the COVID cases, our colleagues' achievements, and our neighbors' cat videos with hardly any pause, looking for information that will help us navigate reality and, one always hopes, brighten our understanding of the world. Czech philosopher Karel Kosik would say that is exactly the dialectics of concrete. I first read Kosik as a student, interested in the world of ideas, creativity, and imagination, the immaterial world, more than the world of economy, where my father wanted to see me as a student. The Faculty of Political Science in Belgrade, where I enrolled in journalism major, was a progressive, but still socialism-colored institution. The curriculum included classes across social sciences and humanities, philosophy, sociology, social psychology, law, political economy, media history, cultural theory, media ethics, foreign languages, English among them, as you could hear, stylistics, rhetoric, and of course, theory and practice of journalism. For those of us interested in the idea of things, a certain level of skill was needed to navigate through the curriculum. We all had to read Marx. There was a lot of mechanics in teaching Marx. Hardly any discussion in that first year of study. A lot of ex-cathedra lectures, closed offices, and unreachable professors. But there was a group of young, open-minded teaching assistants that helped us reconcile three truths about reality: Marx and his reality, Communist Party propaganda, and our own experience of reality. What lecturers failed to deliver, we picked up in tutorials. One tutor, whose work would later inspire me as a journalist to write a weekly column, Political Culture, had just came back from the Fulbright Fellowship in the States, fresh to discuss justice in terms of political philosophy. The working class was idolized across all subjects, but another tutor introduced political sociology by talking about the unions and the right to strike. There were teachers eager to engage with the ideas outside of the heavy stone on institutionalized ideology. And I mention them here because even in a tight and confusing environment, their efforts to open our minds to multiple realities have defined my professional journey ever since. The revisionism literature of the European left helped too. Gramsci, Marcuse, Kolakowski, Yugoslav philosophers whose journal praxis had been banned, but whose work was easy to find. Then came Kosik and his book, The Dialectics of Concrete. Kosik was well known for his work on rejuvenating Marx and open concerns for human freedom. He was expelled from the university for being actively involved in the Prague Spring. His disobedience was incredibly attractive, but there was more to it. Kosik's effort to bring Heidegger, a politically problematic name in socialist Yugoslavia, to understanding Marx, brought the tools many of us future journalists were waiting for, tools for grasping the thing while searching for a way to grasp reality. Because, as Kosik says, what is reality indeed? If it were only a sum of facts, of the simplest and further irreducible elements, then it would follow that first, concreteness is the sum of all facts, and that second, reality in its concreteness is principally unknowable. Behind the backdrop of the study of Kosik in Yugoslavia was indeed another reality. A group of Marxist humanist professors was expelled from the universities. Students were arrested for wanting to celebrate the anniversary of 1968 demonstrations. Movies were banned and heavily censored, and the president's wife was removed from public life. But a young person felt detached from the concrete. Politicians claimed, and journalists reported, that professors were professional anti-communists, enemies of the people, that the students were violent. And the filmmakers, well, they spread pessimism. A couple of years later, an artist who spent 8 months in jail for criticizing the Communist Party asked me how was it possible to study mass communication and journalism and not to protest against political oppression in everyday life. I said, my thoughts were somewhere else. Where were they? The thoughts of a young person faced with an ideological machine that lied to its citizens and used misinformation to control them. Where are the thoughts of my students when Wellington protesters link vaccine and Bill Gates microchips? Or our thoughts when the President of the United States lies? What could we do to counter the rapid spread of online misinformation used by malicious actors across the world? People who homogenize racists and who recruit terrorists. What might help for a start is to look at the structure, conditions, rules, and resources that determine human action, to find both the driving factor of discontent and our vulnerability towards disinformation. So, on discontent first. A study published in the Scientific American says the income share of the top 0.1% of people in the country quadrupled over 4 decades, while the real wages of most people declined. Those that possess as much wealth as the bottom 50% combined. Elites are the real problem, not the conspiracy theorists, writes columnist Matthew Said. People feel that their lives and the lives of the elite exist in a parallel world. Unpacking the truth about 2 parallel worlds was the main idea behind the Pandora Papers. But still, the Zelensky story reads differently in time of peace and in time of war. One wonders if this difference, what happened at one point of time, and what appears to be relevant upon reflection, goes maybe too far. Maybe it is closer to the truth to say that one's approach to knowledge easily gets instrumental. The instrumentalization of truth, as we all know, transcends time. The post-truth world we are living in has been raised at many points throughout history, from ancient Rome up to the present day. Stories that are not true or are meant to be misleading have been used to make money, to change people's views and opinions, to make us question who we can trust. From stories about Marcus Antonius and his drinking, to the 19th century newspaper reports on the existence of unicorns on the moon, times of uncertainty have been a fertile ground for spreading lies and misinformation. Wars, crises, natural disasters make it hard to find the meaning. Even journalists, experts in distilling truth from lies, struggle to extract and verify facts in uncertain times. Unlike popular belief, the facts don't speak themselves. It is we who give them meaning. Many layers of reality, experienced and imagined, sensed and spoken about, mine and yours, form a subject matter of our quest for truth. There were many things that tormented me as a journalist working in the midst of war, the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. For example, contradictory eyewitnesses' accounts. How do you find truth when two people attending the same event say two opposite things? The old professional tool to ask a third and a fourth person and more until the majority are saying the same thing does not work when bullets are flying around. And the only thing you can count on is what you see and what you experience. That is how Robert Fisk described his 20 years of reporting on Middle East. What is real in Lebanon might seem surreal in London, if it were not for the work of journalists and news media in general to put new information in the context of what we already know, to link known and unknown, and to tell stories that can be comprehended, as it is comprehension and repetition that makes human actions meaningful. In Auckland and in Christchurch, in Kiev and Cardiff, in Hobart and Wellington, in Budapest, Ljubljana, Belgrade, Rabat, Jakarta, Washington, Shanghai, Cairo, New York, places I've seen and worked in, journalists believe the truth is out there, ready to be told. What is relevant, how it is told, and who it is aimed at change across national contexts, but the belief that reality exists for journalists to record does not differ. Whatever form it takes, the dynamic between reality and attempts to disclose it transpires. In the case of news media, differences between governments, freedoms, and media systems play a significant role in the outcome of journalists' work. Stories we trust, believe in, retell, and act upon. But they do not diminish the essential component of the practice, a search for the truth about reality. What is behind that search for truth? The most important text for the development of liberal journalism, John Stuart Mill's essay on the liberty of thought and discussion, outlines the basic principles of this search for truth. Mill explains why a healthy democracy requires a free exchange of different arguments. He establishes the principle that has guided journalists ever since. On every subject on which difference of opinion is possible, the truth depends on a balance to be struck between two sets of conflicting reasons. Yes, but what is truth when journalism is under threat? At the start of the war in Ukraine, the Russian parliament adopted the new law imposing prison terms of up to 15 years for spreading what the government says is fake news online. What did Putin and comrades ban? The use of the word war when writing about Ukraine. The term a special operation should be in use. Reports of heavy artillery in residential areas were declared to be illegal. All content that may discredit the Russian army, including photos or videos, illegal. Calls to resist the Russian army, illegal. and so was the calling for sanctions against Russia. It is illegal to call for anti-war public protest or even to share online banned content created by others. How to find truth there? Does truth there depend on a balance of two sets of conflicting reasons, or balancing the power of military machinery and the country under attack's ability to resist? Many international news organizations closed their offices and brought their journalists home from Russia. What is then truth, and who is going to tell it if journalists are not there to report it? That is war. What about other crises? In 2020, the Chinese government cancelled press credentials, refused to renew visas, and expelled 18 foreign correspondents, all Australians, restricting reporting on the COVID-19 pandemic. To protect what? People finding the truth about the virus that would kill, now we know, more than 6 million people across the globe. It is important to repeat that freedom to communicate is the essential right. Freedom of the media is crucial for participative societies, says the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and I cite, "Journalists and the media are crucial to ensure transparency and accountability for public and governmental authorities." What type of journalism is practiced and could be practiced when its professionals are under threat, expelled, jailed, or censored? Not the one that the International Federation of Journalists defines in its global charter of ethics for journalists. The right of everyone to have access to information and ideas underpins the journalist's mission. The journalist's responsibility towards the public takes precedence over any other responsibility, in particular towards their employers and the public authorities. Journalism is a profession which requires time, resources, and the means to practice, all of which are essential to its independence. Why it is important to recall these statements? Because talking about the search for truth and misinformation has to start with journalism as the key vehicle for the transference of information, a vehicle for public conversation. Even in the age dominated by Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Weibo, TikTok, and social media platforms that seem to define public conversation nowadays, journalism remains to play this important role. How far does the intervention go if the main source of misinformation comes from governments, not just the ones that put journalists in jail and censor calling an invasion a war, but the politicians in democratic societies too? Towards the end of Donald Trump's presidency, I looked closely at his role in spreading misinformation. The US president's contribution to fueling extremism, flirting with political fringe, supporting conspiracy theories, and most of all, his Twitter demagogy, created an environment in which he has been seen as an accelerant in his own right. Twitter is a good example of the power of social media. Some sources estimate 330 million people use Twitter monthly in 2020. That is a powerful communication tool. It has given politicians such as Trump the opportunity to promote, to facilitate, and, most importantly, mobilize social groups on a large scale. Using artificial intelligence tools developed by my colleague from Belgium, we analyzed about 500,000 Twitter messages related to QAnon, to identify the misinformation routes and the role religion played in spreading conspiracy theories. Among them, the most powerful conspiracy theory, QAnon. These theories have been constant throughout the history, but 21st century technological advancements have provided a powerful infrastructure for connecting conspiracy-minded individuals. QAnon, the US-originated conspiracy theory, has become a movement with the ability to produce and to promote these ideas at a global scale. Its members and followers, united in a mass rejection of reason, have demonstrated the ability to share and tie together worldviews that distort and shatter reality and create an environment that resembles the birth of a new, very dangerous religion. QAnon believers' claims are complex, contradictory. What started as a sprawling but unfounded conspiracy theory claiming the existence of a global network of political elites and celebrities who want to take down Donald Trump soon expanded to include a secret cabal running a child sex trafficking ring, a secret war between Trump administration and the deep state, wide corruption of the political system, powerful elites using coronavirus as a cover to implant people with microchips, governments erecting 5G towers during lockdown to survey the population, and many other similar apocalyptic nonsense wrapped up in an evangelistic Christianity that increasingly defines the movement. Rooted in populism, the QAnon movement aims to evoke resentment of the everyday person. Its series of confusing claims resemble the conspiracy legends of the past, but as I said, the power of online social media has given them platforms to share, promote, and connect. Of course, efforts have been made to reduce this power. In July 2000, Twitter suspended 7,000 QAnon-related accounts. In August, Facebook deleted 800 groups, 100 pages, 1,500 ads tied to QAnon, and restricted the accounts of hundreds of others. But still, we all have a feeling that more could be done and should have been done. What we found was that every fourth QAnon tweet originated in the US. Over 90% of these profiles shared the content of at least one other identified user. They praised Trump, supported European-based nationalism, tweeted about conspiracies, deep state, coronavirus, religious conspiracies, and political extremism. Hashtags rooted in evangelicalism sometimes portrayed Trump as Jesus, as a superhero, or clad in medieval armor, with underlining biblical references to a coming apocalypse in which he will defeat the forces of evil. Overall, the coronavirus pandemic appeared to function as an important conduit for all such messaging, with QAnon acting as a flag for discontent among far-right movements. Most of the QAnon profiles tap into the same source of information: Trump tweets, YouTube disinformation videos, and each other's tweets. We call it a mutually reinforcing confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, to interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms prior beliefs or values. Harvesting discontent has always been a powerful political tool. We all know that. In a digital world, this is more true than ever. By mid-2020, Donald Trump had 6 times more followers on Twitter than when he was elected. Until he was suspended from the platform, his daily barrage of tweets found a ready audience in ultra-right groups in the US who helped his misinformation and inflammatory rhetoric jump the Atlantic and come to Europe. And come our way to New Zealand, trashing parliamentary grounds in Wellington. The social media platforms attempt to reduce the spread of disinformation by suspending or restricting accounts and deleting groups seems to increase rather than decrease the toxicity of messages. One wonders why is that? A couple of words about algorithms. What is commonly known as an algorithm is actually a feature of code. That code is created by a programmer, a human, therefore subject to the institutional, political, cultural, and economic logic of its creator. Our concerns about information technology, which in the past we simply called computers and the internet, are now crystallized around algorithms that drive social media traffic, merging information and disinformation to the extent that we don't believe what we see. We talk about the age of algorithms because we are worried that machine processing millions of codes engraved in every step of digital interactions have become a powerful force in our experience of reality, most notably our understanding of the world. While algorithms are an automated set of rules which do not have an agency, their creators and users, computer scientists and citizens, do have an agency. In a newsroom, the algorithms, for example, significantly affect the choice of news, and by influencing news production, carry a capacity to influence people's opinions and behaviors. What are we worried about? We are worried that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media giants use algorithms without paying enough attention to what effect they have on people's understanding of themselves, their place in society, and their understanding of the world. Research on the commercialized search engines, for example, has revealed inherent biases in the ways search engines such as Google operate. The search engines' algorithms marginalize minority groups and reproduce inequalities, to mention just the most obvious example. Let me say for a while, with the algorithms behind the search engines, their aim in the chain of news production, if we stay in the realm of traditional media and journalism, is to assist journalists in identifying potential resources for producing news stories. Algorithms typically rank the news elements from various sources based on statistical analysis, outliers, trends, and correlations. This significantly affects the choice of events, issues, and people that will appear in the news, and it affects the story that emerges. Subsequently, algorithms influence the structure of public discourse and people's opinion about political and social reality, a reality where a wide spectrum of actors have stepped into public communication space, producing, sharing, and co-creating content based on information, but misinformation and disinformation too. This comes at a moment when many people appear to have little confidence in the press, much as they have diminished faith in institutions as a whole, and at a time when social actors of many kinds pursue a deliberate strategy of disinformation for political or financial purposes, including through forms of computational propaganda. In the post-truth era, the line between information, misinformation, and disinformation gets blurred, easily blurred. If we go back to journalism and the search for truth, we could easily see how hostile the environment in which journalism operates has become. The social media noise tends to challenge journalism and its role in society. Relying on the old definition of its purpose, the purpose of journalism to provide information citizens need to be free and self-governing, to inform, to bear witness, to serve as a watchdog, to give a meaning to events beyond our own experience, to set the tone for public discourse, is not simply enough anymore. My investigation of the relationship between journalism and political change, for example, shows that in peaceful times, when the sphere of consensus is strong, the rules of finding trustworthy information are clear. In politically rigid times, in times of crisis, times of war, the rules are reduced to a set of unwritten conventions that modify the information landscape to reflect the importance of events and the agents of the events as well. An analysis of newspaper front page content showed that political and military tensions usually bring more news items per page than relatively stable political situations. In Serbia and in New Zealand, too. I have done studies, 100 years of a front page of Serbian newspaper and 100 years of the Dominion Post or the Dominion. The analysis of Twitter shows the same. What does more news in time of crisis indicate? The first assumption is there are simply more dramatic, relevant events that deserve our attention. A page with more items and the social media feed full of hashtags reflects the algorithm-supported strategy of dealing with information overload. More information in times of crisis resembles a dense jungle of news items, a feature that leads us to draw a map of reality as much as we are able, and we all know how different we are. The pandemic and its associated lockdown restrictions have been met by following the traditional news, but also by a rapid uptake in digital technology, where people were more likely to increase their digital communication than to decrease it. The growth has been caused by humanitarian and economic needs, as everyday and in-person activities like working, going to school, grocery shopping have relocated to an online environment. What has this increase in all forms of digital media use brought to humanity? Connectedness in times of isolation, work, virtual but still work, in times of disruption, a sense of belongingness instead of feelings of loneliness and frustration. Scholars say that the shift to the online realm has elevated the power of digital spaces in the pandemic. They were the main way to access information and services, and also one of the only remaining avenues where economic, educational, leisure, and social interactions could take. The calls for building up new infrastructure to support quality information are loud and clear. They are coming from politicians, from citizens, from media professionals, from all of us, even from the owners of Facebook and Twitter. They are and have to be addressed by all of us. But what each of us do to distinguish truth from lie and embrace and understand the world with a spectrum of appearances in between? If we follow Heraclitus, the things that can be seen, heard, and learned should be the ones to prize the most. This is the empirists talking. For Quakers too, personal experience is given high priority, although collective discernment and further inquiry are also critical. In the world of knowledge that formed me as a journalist and journalism researcher, the search for truth is the purpose of these inquiries. The world has changed in the digital age, and so has people's sense of reality. Our ability to access information increased, but our ability to understand information accessed and to weed information from misinformation lags behind. Our search for the truth and the way we order our lives in view of the truth tell us we can only deal with things insofar as they resemble what has been experienced in the past. When I see a refugee from Ukraine waiting to cross the Polish border, I know that she fears both the death and the life in the shadow of a death. When I find the old Zelensky story reprinted from The Guardian to a Greek online outlet, I think of former Yugoslavia and the medium of conflict to which information technologies have contributed. When I see Trump's tweets resurfacing in Europe and his slogans shouted at the parliamentary grounds in New Zealand, I know that the interplay between the abstract idea of truth and its reflection in people's minds has tangible consequences. For all of us working in the universities, and I would like to conclude with that, it is time to start teaching our students how to further develop and export tools for information and gaining knowledge about the world and reality we are living in, to export these tools so that citizens learn techniques for finding ways to make people critical of the content they consume. That would provide, I think, a suitable catalyst for rethinking and surviving the misinformation age we are living in now. Thank you.
You've been listening to Varitza Rupar, Professor of Journalism at the School of Communication Studies at AUT, presenting the annual Quaker Lecture for 2022. A podcast of this lecture is available on the Plains FM website. Search Community Talks.